Athletic Football Show.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show, brought to you by Thursday Night Football, only on Prime Video. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me tonight is my co-host, Derrik Klassen. Derrik, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, we end Sunday Night Football with a kind of a bizarre drive.
Yeah, you're doing great. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing great.
Yep, I'm doing okay. This is, my fandom is not staked in this. We got a couple of upsets today, a couple of other really fun performances. So a really nice treat for week 2.
We did not have the Bears-Texans game on the outline here. Just so you guys understand the mechanics of this, typically we're prepping for the show during the Sunday Night Football game. Unfortunately, I had to watch this game and watch more of it than I typically would because I'm so emotionally invested. We're going to spend a couple minutes talking about this before we get into the meat of the outline. It was a disaster. Like, I'm going to wait until I wasn't half watching the game, or not half watching, but watching it while I was prepping for a podcast. And I also would like to go watch the tape. It was gross. It was ugly on so many different fronts. And we can talk about some of the details, but the interior offensive line being unable to pick up a stunt, period, and just pretty elementary stuff. Darnell Wright getting roasted by Danielle Hunter multiple different times. The quarterback looking pretty lost at times. I mean, just some like bizarre misses down the field, and down the field accuracy has been consistently an issue. I'm concerned. I'm going to be concerned until it starts looking better. Tonight was not a good experience. That's what I would say.
Yeah, you were sold a different, tale for the Bears quarterback situation, and we're kind of back in the same spot that we've always been with them. I still, most of this to me came down to the offensive line. I mean, Danielle Hunter getting home to Caleb on that last drive was, I mean, he just full on bear tackled him. That was kind of just insane to watch. And then to me, like, you kind of
Darnell Wright just looks lost. I mean, after the spin move, He just looks lost, and that's the case for a lot of the guys on the offense right now.
He was playing lookout protection, where you just guy gets by and you scream lookout, and that's all you got. But then the Bears feel like they were just waving the white flag with pass protection. They were in split back gun the entire game, which says, all right, we need as many guys back here as possible. So it was just not an encouraging performance.
So they did that last year in Seattle. They were doing a ton of weird, wonky pass protection stuff with the tight ends. And the thought was, oh, well, the personnel is just so bad. They need to do this. And this is a creative solution to the problem. The Bears don't have backup tackles in the game right now, like Seattle did for half of that season last year. There are personnel issues in the middle of the offensive line, the center and the right guard. Those are pieces that you were kind of piecing together. Nate Davis has been a question for the last 2 years. Your tackles are not supposed to be a huge, massive issue. So I'm starting to think that some of these pass protection problems might be following Shane Waldron from what happened in Seattle to what's happening in Chicago right now. And there are plenty of teams out there that do not have stellar offensive lines, have offensive line personnel concerns that aren't running into some of these problems. We're going to talk about the Saints in a minute. The Saints don't have an offensive line full of stars, and this looks pretty good for them on offense. So again, I'm going to take a beat. We'll talk about this game later in the week, I'm sure, as I get a chance to go back and rewatch it and watch the tape. But this is definitely a concerning outing for the Bears in that offense, even as the defense did a pretty darn good job keeping them in the game.
Can I say one thing quickly about CJ Stroud?
You sure can.
Yeah, I tweeted this during the game. He is entering the rare category of quarterback where when he throws like outside of the broadcast angle and the camera has to pan, he's one of, I think now, like 3 or 4 quarterbacks where I just assume it will be completed. And he had like 4 of those plays this game.
I had the exact same feeling tonight. It was probably because my experience tonight was colored a little bit differently than my typical CJ Stroud watching. But every single time the ball left his hand with any down the field whatsoever, I was just like, it's probably being caught. And the Bears did a pretty good job of taking that stuff away later in the game, but he has definitely entered that territory. So I 100% agree with you there. All right, here, let's start the show with what we were going to start the show with, and that is the Bengals and the Chiefs playing another excellent game that goes down to the wire. The Chiefs win a wild one over Cincinnati, 26-25, comes down to a pivotal pass interference penalty on the Bengals to give the Chiefs a chance to win that game. Even with the Bengals looking shaky last week and the Chiefs offense rolling in week 1 against Baltimore, these teams still managed to play a very competitive game that goes down to the last moment. What, in your mind, what felt the most different about these two teams in week 2 compared to week 1 that kept this closer than we might have expected coming into the game?
I would say I'll start with the Chiefs. I thought, first of all, their pass rush or their ability to pass protect and shut down the Bengals pass rush, I thought was kind of concerning. I mean, Trey Hendrickson kind of had his day. At a certain point, they switched left tackles like late in the fourth quarter where they were like, all right, we just have to switch this up. We have to do anything. And that kind of played into the Chiefs not really being able to, I think, push the ball down the field as much as they wanted to, and especially as much as they were able to in week one. And then on the other side of the ball, I thought Joe Burrow actually showed that he could throw the intermediate and deep ball. Much differently and much better than he did in week one. Like we said in week one, he just seemed like he was playing kind of like he did in week one of last year, where he just a lot of check downs, getting the ball out too quickly, all that stuff. But he made a handful of really nice plays down the field in this game. And then he was really good in the red zone. And so if you can move the ball that way and that's enough, like putting up 25 points the way they did, especially after how they looked week one, totally okay with it. It's just, this is one of those games that these two teams, it's always going to come down to one or two weird bounces, weird calls. And that's all it was.
Yeah, I felt the same way about the Bengals offense. I was actually really encouraged by the way that it looked. I thought that Joe Burrow did a good job of controlling the game for the most part, taking completions and those couple ambitious shots that they took. You need those. I mean, you need 3, 4, 5 of those a game. And there was the one off of play action to Eric All, who seems, I'm actually pretty excited about what he looked like today. Just another like explosive pass catching option for them as they kind of figure out what they're going to look like over the next couple of years. But that play action concept where he runs like a deep corner early in the third quarter, I was like, okay, like I can get behind some of this stuff. You guys need more of these kind of throws and these kind of ambitious shots down the field. And Joe Burrow was not afraid to take those today. And I still thought that he did a really good job again of just controlling the offense, piloting the offense, taking what was there. And then on defense, Trey Hendrickson almost single-handedly won the game for the Bengals. I mean, the Chiefs offense today, one of three things happened when they had the ball. They either turned it over, and we can get into some of those turnovers. The drive was torpedoed by a sack or a penalty, typically one drawn by Trey Hendrickson, or they scored a touchdown. like those were the three things that happened when the Chiefs had the ball. And Trey Hendrickson went a long way in almost swinging that game single-handedly for Cincinnati. Because, again, we talked about this. There aren't a lot of secondary pass rushers on that team right now. Today, they almost didn't need any.
That's what's funny, and we'll talk about another team where it felt like that was going on too. But yeah, we talked about going into the year, especially after week 1 too, where it was like, man, Hendrickson is awesome, but they need somebody else. Maybe sometimes if the other left tackle is not good enough, maybe you don't need another guy. Maybe you just need a Trey Hendrickson to force the other team to sub the other guy out. So yeah, I was pretty encouraged kind of by what they did on both sides of the ball. I still, have my questions about the Bengals defense. But this Bengals defense, no matter what, always shows up against the Chiefs anyway. So props to them for doing it again.
I also thought it was a really poor game for Patrick Mahomes overall. Just some strange moments, some strange decisions. I mean, he threw 2 picks. He easily could have thrown a third. That was a ticky-tack illegal contact that had nothing to do with the play on that throw to Watson down the left sideline. The throw to Worthy, that was one of those plays where both the design and the decision are curious to me. Right? Like we talked all about week 1, where it's like, oh, they're using such a good job. They're doing such a good job of using Worthy to create space for other people. It's not these vertical routes down the sideline where he can get muscled by some of these bigger corners. And on that play, Cam Taylor-Britt essentially ejects him out of bounds on a go route, leaves absolutely no room. A ball Mahomes probably shouldn't have thrown anyway, but Worthy's not making that any easier on him, and it gets intercepted. And then the ball was picked off by Davis Gaither is a terrible decision. Like, I just don't think he ever saw him. So I don't know what it is about Mahomes when he plays against the Bengals, but he seems to lose his mind like 3 or 4 times in ways that are totally inexplicable.
There's kryptonite, man. Even the best quarterbacks have one for whatever reason. The Worthy one was just bizarre to me. I'm sorry. I'm never throwing a go ball against press coverage to Xavier Worthy. It's not happening. He's like 170 pounds, unless he just absolutely wins on the first step. And he's probably not going to against a guy like Cam Taylor-Britt, he was pretty good at getting hands on you. That's his game, is that he gets hands on you, he tackles, that sort of stuff. So I'm never throwing that ball. I just didn't really understand that decision. The first one he threw to Akeem Davis Gaithers, they're running like cover 2, and Kelsey is trying to slot into that hole like underneath the deep Tampa dropper in between the 2 other hook defenders, and the other guy just melts right into it. So I don't know how Mahomes doesn't see it. I'm sure he's seen that coverage a million times, especially from this Bengals team, and just thought he could get away with it.
Yeah, and again, that's just the fumble by Carson Steele is another just moment where it's an absolutely back-breaking play for the Chiefs. But again, it all comes out in the wash, considering the Shamari Connor fumble return is one of the only reasons that the Chiefs win this game and are in this game. And then you have the pass interference, obviously, at the end, which it's always tough when the game swings on a moment like that. But at the same time, it's a penalty, right? Like you kind of have to call that. He's there super early, even though you don't want to see a game decided by a flag in the final moments. But in that case specifically, I was like, all right, like I understand it. I understand why that has to happen.
Especially the Chiefs too. People are already so ready to be up in
I
arms about
know,
any
I know,
Chiefs
I
thing
know.
with the refs. So yeah, that one was annoying, but it is a penalty. And I'm usually the guy that's defending the defender on DPIs where I'm like, no, that's not a penalty. Come on, like let him play ball. But that one, I mean, you get there a second early behind the back. It's yeah, come on.
And Chamari Connor had the touchdown. They also had the huge 3rd and 6 sack. They didn't bring a lot of pressure in this game. Spags did, but they heated him up with the game on the line on 3rd down. Connor gets home, gives the Chiefs the ball back. So 2 big plays by kind of a secondary Chiefs defender, right? Like somebody that we don't think of as a household name, but that seems to be the case every single year with the Chiefs, where they're just finding these guys in the defensive backfield in the woodwork over and over and over again. And it feels like Chamari Connor is on deck to be one of those guys for Steve Spagnuolo.
There's always another one. I mean, a guy like L'Jarius Sneed or whatever is just going to pop out of the woodwork. There's always one.
How do you feel about the Bengals moving forward? Right? They're 0-2 now, which is a huge hole to be in, but the Ravens are also 0-2. Still feels like there's ground to make up in the division. They have a pretty easy schedule, all things considered. You know, the Patriots were supposed to be one of the worst teams in the league. So you're supposed to win that one, but getting the Chiefs in week 2, for the most part, this team isn't looking at the sort of uphill climb that a lot of the other contenders in the AFC are, just because they're playing this season with the last place schedule. So I'm not super worried, and I actually am encouraged by some of the things that they did today, but starting 0-2 is never good, obviously.
Right. Defensively, I think I still have my questions. I think this is still going to be one of the worst run defenses in the league. If the secondary can just play even at like an average, slightly above average level, then that would be a huge win for them. Offensively, this game did kind of encourage me a lot. I still have some questions about the offensive line, but that's been the case even when the Bengals have been a really good team. So if Joe Burrow can play the way that he did today, and then we just insert T. Higgins back into the lineup whenever he comes back, and then you add that on top of the fact that, you mentioned earlier, Eric, like Mike Gesicki has kind of been a useful player for them. Andre Yoshivas had 2 touchdowns in this game, just like really, really good ability to get open in the red zone. So they have some pieces, especially in the passing game. Again, still worried about offensive line and run game, but I think we said going into the season, if Joe Burrow is healthy and they have all these pass catchers, you probably can still put up enough points to win 9 or 10 games and be okay.
Yeah, and I think that Joe Burrow looked right today and looked like Joe Burrow in a way that was encouraging to me. So not the start you want going 0-2, but I do think there are better days ahead for the Bengals and especially for this offense. All right, let's get to You Have My Attention.
Well, gentlemen, you have my curiosity. Now you have my attention.
For those of you guys who are unfamiliar, every Sunday, obviously, there's 10 million things coming at you, especially with 10 early games. 10 early games is unacceptable.
It is.
Track of 10 noon games is just one of my least favorite parts of how the NFL divvies up the schedule. So each Sunday on these shows, we try to pull out some moments that really grabbed our attention over the course of the day. As all that stuff is coming your way, what are the 3, 4, 5 performances that really kind of grab you by the shirt collar? And let's start with the New Orleans Saints offense. Put up 44 points against the Cowboys today. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Saints, Clint Kubiak, Derek Carr, everybody associated with that group, you guys have my attention.
Props to them, man. There was a world, I thought the optimistic view where it was, there's a world where the pass protection's still bad, but they've got all these pieces. Maybe you can get Derek Carr to play at an above average level again, and you can be like a quality offense. This being the highest scoring offense through 2 weeks where you are just, I think they've scored like every single drive with their starters. Like they are truly just mashing teams. And we came into this week saying, you know what, you do it against the Panthers. We knew the Panthers were going to be bad. Can you do it against a Mike Zimmer defense that just blew up the Browns in week 1? And then they did. And they just absolutely got their way with them the entire game. And the biggest thing to me was that's exactly it, is they had their way. The Cowboys were forced to play 50 snaps of base defense in this game. The Saints were able to just stay under center. They were able to be in heavier personnel. They were able to run the ball. They were able to play the exact Shanahan-Kubiak style of game that you want to play. And we've seen at certain points before, when Derek Carr was with John Gruden, if he can get into that style of offense and it's running well like a machine, he can make some damn throws, man. And he certainly did in this game.
I love the plan in terms of what they're trying to do on offense. We've talked all about the play action and the motion. And if you watch the basic structure of what they're trying to do, there's tons of movement before the snap, whether it's guys slicing across the formation, whether it's, just receivers going in quick motion. It feels very dynamic on that side. And then you combine that with all of the play action that they're using and all of the heavy personnel, what it's allowing them to do. We talked about this a little bit last week. I think the two things that are most important to me. One, it's really encouraging a certain level of aggression from the way that Derek Carr is playing the position. And we'll talk about the Shaheed touchdown in a second, which is just a ridiculous choice and a ridiculous throw. But the other part of this is by being in all this heavy personnel and using all of this play action, they're wadding up these plays over and over and over again, and you're making your pass protection issues matter less. And we could talk about 3 or 4 different examples from even the first quarter or drive of that game. They've got tight ends slicing across the formation. Often it's 2 guys. Sometimes it's somebody going in motion. Sometimes it's somebody sliding across the formation. They're getting 4 hands on Micah Parsons. They're just getting 4 guys over 3 as they kind of wad up one side. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're just trying to make sure that they're dealing with their pass protection issues to give them a chance to take shots against heavy personnel. And their quarterback right now, who has not always been this way, has been willing to take it with really explosive receivers. And it's actually been fun as hell to watch.
Derek Carr does this like once every 3 or 4 years where all the stars align and he just turns into like a top 10 quarterback. Like he can play at that level every now and then. I think what's so fascinating is, kind of like I mentioned earlier, the Saints are getting everything that they want. They are on first and second downs as a rushing team. They have a 51.6% success rate per True Media. That is the best in the NFL right now, which that, again, if you're getting into better down and distances, you're going to help your pass protection. That is not so great right now. They also have the second most under center play action passes through 2 weeks. So first is obviously the Lions. Of course, they do a lot of that. And they have like 11 yards per attempt on those plays. They are just, when you are getting a first down every time you call like a type of play, that is completely insane. It is just bonkers. So it's really just cool that they have such a clear formula with all of what they're doing. And then Derek Carr every now and then just gets into this mode where he plays to his arm talent.
They're pretty much doing they did the same play like several different times over the first half. It's like the most classic Shanahan Kubiak play action play you can possibly run. It's like one big clear out on one side and a huge over coming back the other way. And early in the game, they hit Olave on the monstrous over as Shaheed bleeds it out. And then the touchdown to Shaheed, it's a too high coverage. He just runs through it and Carr throws the ball over the too high coverage, which is just insane on so many levels. The fact that Derek Carr is pushing the ball to that degree, and the fact that you have a guy with that much juice that's just splitting the safeties for that sort of touchdown. I did not anticipate the New Orleans Saints offense being this sort of unit.
And he did it under pressure again. Like he was not perfectly clean when he made that throw, it's the exact same throw he made last week against the Carolina Panthers, again under pressure. Like you're probably not going to hit that throw every week, but they're at least proving that it's a pretty consistent pitch that they can go to.
It's been awesome so far. I do have my questions about what it looks like when they're forced to play a slightly different way. Like when they're forced to get into a drop back game where you can't just have 2 guys out in the route and keep gashing people like it's 2017. Like that's what it felt like today. I mean, this just felt like a Shanahan offense playing the hits against a team that was having to play in base personnel. I think just because they're trying to match what you're doing with 2 tight ends, two backs, whatever. But at the same time, they're worried about getting gashed on the ground because we'll talk about this a little bit later. I'm still a little bit concerned about the personnel for the Cowboys defense. Like what they have in their front 7 right now, they were getting their asses kicked pretty consistently. And I think that's part of the reason you feel compelled to put some bigger bodies on the field. When you're playing against a defense that is maybe a little bit better suited to fight fire with this style of play, I wonder if you have to have a few more answers in your passing game than the Saints have shown so far. But right now, who cares? Like they're not making you do anything else and you're just torching them over and over again.
Exactly. And I have some degree of faith that it will be okay. Because you know what I will say about Derek Carr, when I went back and charted him last year for reception perception, it was better than I thought it was. And especially in terms of some of the true drop back games. So obviously they're not going to put up 40 points when they have to be forced into those game scripts, but there's a decent chance that they still end up okay.
The one throw that actually was probably my favorite of the day because there was no play action. There was no kind of clearing out the middle of the field. It was the throw he hit to Olave by the goal line. That's
Oh,
just a
man.
drop back concept where he sees an inch of space and he just lets that thing rip on the money. That was the play where I was like, all right. I mean, if you're going to play like this with these pass catchers and how explosive this group is, I could absolutely get behind this.
And what to me was more encouraging, it wasn't a perfect throw. Like, I'm so glad that he was willing to throw it and play with that timing and play with that confidence, but he leaves it like a little bit too high and a little bit too inside. Olave just turns his back and snags it anyway. And it's like, oh man, if Olave is going to make all those plays if they're going to get as many plays open as they are, and then guys like Olave are going to make plays like that when it's not perfect, dude.
It's a great point, because one of the things with Olave over the last couple of years, physicality has been a question. Like, what are the contested catches going to look like? What's he going to do after the catch? And so far, I think there have been guys at those skill position spots up front across this entire offense, including Clint Kubiak, who have been a slightly different version of who we expected them to be coming into the year. And when you can get 5, 6, 7 guys putting up those sorts of performances, that's how you end up with a unit that is vastly outperforming expectations. And that's where the Saints offense is right now. Let's keep going here. Next one I wanted to talk about, Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 2-0 after going on the road and beating a Detroit Lions team that I think a lot of people expected to be very serious Super Bowl contenders this year. And after their offense was just high flying last week and did whatever they wanted to against Washington, their defense carried them today. I mean, their offense struggled down to down. You had Baker having to make a couple plays with his feet that became huge over the course of that game. You had the long Chris Godwin touchdown, but down to down efficiency, it was a bad day and a rough day for the Bucs offense. And it didn't seem to matter because of how hard that defense was making it for Jared Goff. So the 2-0 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, after some questions about how real that division title actually was last year, you guys have my attention.
They certainly do. I mean, we walked into this game saying, okay, you know what? They gave him a game last year. A lot of these same pieces are back on both sides. This should be a game again. And I wouldn't have picked the Bucs to win, but it was a really fun game to watch. Offensively for the Bucs, like you said, not as exciting as it was last week. This passing wise, it was kind of funny. It seemed like every play for the Bucs offense was either Baker Mayfield scrambling and making a play, making a nice throw, or he was getting sacked by Aidan Hutchinson. Like those are the only things that were happening.
That was part of the problem.
Right. And so like Baker's passing numbers looked good. It's just that he was sacked 5 or 6 times. So it ends up pulling it down there. Defensively is where I was just so impressed, man. And you would think what was actually really interesting to me about this game is you would think going in, okay, a Todd Bowles defense completely shut down Jared Goff. How did it happen? Well, they must have sent a bunch of pressure at him and it must have really gotten to him. That's actually not why this game happened. Like they sent a lot of pressure. I think they sent 20 dropbacks worth of pressure at Jared Goff, and he was fine on a lot of those plays. Like he had like 7.5 yards per attempt. He was playing really well. It was the plays where they only sent 4 that Jared Goff had 4.7 yards per attempt. And some of those are kind of pressures where they're, sending a linebacker, but dropping an end off and just kind of confusing the look for Jared Goff. But those were really the plays where they were really getting to him. And then when they were going into those just rushing 4, man, their defensive backs just clicking and closing on everything. Zion McCollum had an incredible game. Jordan Whitehead had a really good game, made a handful of plays in the back end, one on the end zone just before the half. So
Christian
it was just
had a couple of moments. I mean, that group
Yes.
on the back end, I was very impressed by. I had the same takeaway in terms of the schematics of it all. They only blitzed on 26% of Jared Goff's dropbacks today. That would be normal for an NFL team on an NFL Sunday, but we talked about this in the week 2 preview. They blitzed on 52% of Goff's dropbacks in the playoff game last year. So we're talking about half. And it's not like they were just bringing a conventional 4 throughout that game. Like you mentioned, there were a lot of simulated pressures, creepers, where they're bringing 4 guys, but you don't know which 4 are coming, and you don't know who's going to be dropping into coverage. There was a 3rd and 7. There was like 13 minutes left in the 4th quarter where the Lions are trying to run a dagger that they run all the time. They're clearing it out. They're bringing in the big end behind it. And Joe Tryon-Shoyinka drops all the way from the line of scrimmage back into that dagger window, and Goff has to dirt it. And that was happening over and over again in this game. Tryon-Shoyinka had 40 pass plays in this game. He dropped on 10 of them. And so I think the Lions just had a really hard time getting a beat on what the coverage was going to look like, which bodies were going to be back there. And I think they looked out of sorts offensively in a way I honestly don't remember them looking like this against a defense that we don't consider like one of the elite units in the league. They just look like they never had their footing over the course of this entire game. And I was not used to seeing Ben Johnson and Jared Goff at this stage of their partnership look like that, even in games that are sometimes uneven. They always kind of find it by the end. And I just don't think they ever really got there today.
It's annoying too, because the run game was actually kind of, they had some really nice moments, and then it just seemed after a certain point they didn't feel
it was okay
into it. Yeah, it was
it was
fine.
okay. It wasn't as good as you want it to be from this Lions team. And I think that was part of the problem, is they couldn't lean on it to the degree that they wanted to over the course of the day.
But Vita Vea also left the game at a certain point. And so I thought with a close game that they would still start to lean on it in the second half, and they really just kind of kept going back to Jared Goff. I'm really glad you brought up them dropping Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. I think on Jared Goff's second interception, they drop Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. They send a linebacker, just absolutely blows up the running back. He hits Goff as he's throwing, and Goff throws it into basically no man's land. And I think that might have been maybe Christian Izien picked it off, somebody over the middle of the field.
That was the game-sealing interception.
Yeah, that was like, it ended it. And so like just that type of stuff that they were getting at Jared Goff all game was it was a really, really impressive performance.
The first Jared Goff interception, I think, kind of speaks to what this game felt like, where he's just trying to throw a timing route. I think it was to Jameson Williams on like an in-breaker over the middle. Jameson Williams gets caught up just enough. There's a little bit of a contact with the DB, and it gets intercepted. And that's kind of how this game felt, where a lot of those plays where the Lions could just let those things rip over the middle, or they're playing on time because of how much trust they have in the offense. That trust wasn't there today. And there were just some bizarre choices. Like there was a play, I'm trying to find my notes on it. I don't know, what was it? Oh, there was a play. It was like, there was like 5:17 left in the third quarter, and they had like a deep 2-man route, and there was just absolutely nothing there. Like, I don't understand why it was a 2-man route. Nobody was open. And like watching the Lions today, that there were more moments like that than I remember, where it's just like, what is that? Like, what are they even trying to accomplish with this play? And I just can't remember coming away from a Ben Johnson game feeling that way. Sometimes Goff gets heated up, he plays poorly, you're turning the ball over more than you want to, etc. But just the lack of cohesive plan. And I think they're still trying to figure out, all right, what is Jameson Williams in all of this? How do we use all of these pieces, etc. But it just felt more disjointed than I remember this offense feeling like for most of the last couple seasons.
I think that's a great point. Usually you feel like win or lose, this team kind of had a good beat on what they were supposed to be doing. I do think this was kind of a game where you felt the loss of Josh Reynolds. I think having a guy who maybe had some size to compete with some of these bigger Tampa Bay Bucks, cornerbacks and stuff would have been nice to have. The fact that he wasn't there hurts you a little bit.
And there's like a 2nd and 12 at one point where they tried to throw like a deep curl to St. Brown, and Jamal Dean was just sitting on it. There was a 3rd and 12 where they tried to throw a ball outside the numbers to Tim Patrick. What's like, why? Like, you think that's your best throw on this play? And he had Laporta underneath. Like, it just so many choices where it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And the Bucks they jumped on it. And again, having a game plan that is a little bit unconventional, a little bit surprising based on the tendencies you've shown, I think that's one of the quickest ways to get an offense into this sort of rut where they do feel a little disjointed over the course of the game. So you have to give Todd Bowles and the defensive staff a lot of credit for putting them in that position. All right, let's get to our next one here. The Minnesota Vikings also are 2-0 with a huge win over the San Francisco 49ers. The Vikings, Sam Darnold, Brian Flores, all of you guys have my attention after the first 2 weeks.
That's the thing. I don't know which side of the ball I want to start with, because they're both kind of captivating for one reason or another.
I want to start with the defense. Like, the defense is what jumped out to me, just because they're just doing, first of all, I don't know if you sent this to us in the Slack. Yep. Brock Purdy said to somebody after the game at midfield, like, the scheme is crazy.
I think
like,
it was you Brian Flores.
I think it might have been two Brian Flores. The scheme is crazy. And if you watch that game, the scheme is crazy. Purdy was pressured on 34% of his dropbacks in this game. When he was blitzed, he finished 10 of 15 with 91 yards, a pick, and 4 sacks. So he took 6 sacks over the course of this game. And he was pressured 40% of the time when blitzed. We can dig into some of the specific moments, but all of the shit that the Vikings were throwing at him in this game, he just never got a handle on what they were trying to do to him.
No, not from the first minute. I mean, there was a throw early on where he tries to throw like a little sit or like a little hitch route over one of the hashes, and it almost gets picked off. And then later in the game, he throws a pick trying to throw the same route because it's like his little check down, because I think this was kind of a game for Purdy where he either had the throw that he wanted almost immediately and was able to make an insane throw. He made a handful of really great throws in this game. But then on the plays where he didn't, he was either getting sacked or he was trying to throw an interception, which is a lot of how this game went the last time, right? Where Purdy was making a handful of really good throws, and then you just get baited into 2 or 3 horrible decisions, and that's how the game ends up like this.
There was a play that I tweeted out. I think it was in the first half. The Vikings had the Niners had like a 3rd and 5. The Vikings were lined up in a cover 0 look. And at the snap, they just completely eject out of it. And Harrison Smith goes from the line of scrimmage into the flat. They play just this crazy version of cover 2 behind it. And while they're doing that, the Vikings are running a stunt up front where Jihad Ward just ear holes the right tackle, and Jonathan Grenard comes on the loop, gets a hand in Purdy's face, and it's incomplete. And that's what the game felt like the entire day, where you're not sure who's coming and who's not. The defensive line is just playing with a ton of energy and physicality, so many stunts where, you have loopers coming from all over the place. It's hard to pin down like which guys are actually blitzing. Like Jihad Ward's over the center one time he's over the defensive end. There's a time where Van Ginkel's lined up, but he's the one that's dropping. It's a defense that, it's the idea of it coming into the season was, now that we have players that better fit what this defense wants to look like, what can Brian Flores accomplish? And this is the plan. Like, this is what it was supposed to be, where you have your Van Ginkels, you have your Dallas Turners, and what Harrison Smith is doing is like, it's insane watching him before the snap. Like, it's insane. Where he's lined up has absolutely no bearing on what he is going to do on any given play. Zero. I mean, it's crazy watching him on the dots where he'll be in the deep half, but he starts the play just kind of roaming around the line of scrimmage before bailing back. And we've seen other guys do that in the past, but when he has a handle on what a system is supposed to feel like, that's the type of player that he is. That's what he felt like under Zimmer too. And it seems like that's the place that we've gotten to with the Vikings defense, where all the new additions are perfectly suited for playing this way. And the guys who now have 2 years in the system have gotten so comfortable that they're able to just turn things up a notch.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. And, to me, this almost feels like, it felt like last year, the way we talked about him was almost like a Walmart, kind of bizarro version of what Wink Martindale was doing at his best in Baltimore. This feels like the actual thing now. Like, this feels like have fully gotten there.
This is way more complex and crazy to me. All the things that they're trying to do are just insane.
Yeah, I'm very bought in on what they've got defensively now.
Yeah, I'm trying. There's so many other examples in this game. There's like a play in the second quarter, the opening play of the second quarter, where they tried to run a swing to the right side, and Van Ginkel takes away the swing, even though he was supposed to be part of the rush. And so that was like a 0-yard sack. There was a sack on 3rd down in the 3rd quarter where there was a stunt with Ward and Tillery where they just crushed the pocket and Pat Jones finishes it off. There's a sack in the 3rd quarter where Van Ginkel hits the tight end just enough to throw him off the route. Purdy's timing is thrown off. He has to hold it for just a second. And I think it was Jones comes unblocked because there was like a full slide to the right. The timing was just a little bit off the entire day. And when you have those bodies up front coming at you in all of those ways that are hard to pin down, you're just going to be on your heels the entire game. And that's what Purdy felt like.
Well, and especially this offense and this quarterback, it feels like the entire thing is built out of timing. And obviously, Purdy has a little bit more creativity outside the pocket than previous Shanahan quarterbacks back there. But there is still some degree of like, this thing needs to be on a certain schedule. And there are only a handful of coordinators that can probably do it as well as Brian Flores.
We could also talk about what happened on the offense for the Vikings today, because there's some encouraging stuff on that side of the ball too. Where would you like to start with what we've seen from Sam Darnold over the first couple of weeks?
I think the Sam Darnold experience has been perfect because you're still getting both sides of him very much.
It's so true.
He still is trying to throw picks, and there were a couple that got dropped in this game. He's forcing balls over the middle of the field. It looks, in that sense, exactly how you would think it would. But then they're also scheming some stuff up, and he obviously has a really good arm to make some of those throws. And then every now and then, he makes a throw that isn't necessarily schemed up that well, and you're like, man, that's why you went top 5 in the draft. Like the seam ball that he threw to, I think, Jalen Naylor, where he
fits to Jalen Naylor. It was an insanely good throw.
He fits it in between like 3 people, like leaves it like low and on the back hip, so he turns and like spins away from the hit. It was just that is the type of throw that we praise Matthew Stafford and CJ Stroud and Dak Prescott for. And so for Sam Darnold to come in here and make this throw, it was just incredibly well put together. Like, I think this was the perfect game where you got the running game was going well. Kevin O'Connell was scheming up a handful of throws for him and making some plays. Darnold had 1 or 2 wow throws and then still had like 1 or 2 oopsie moments. Like, this is what you bought when you got Sam Darnold in free agency. This is what you wanted.
That was a 3rd down throw with the game essentially on the line. Like, they needed to get a first down on that play to stop the Niners from getting the ball back. And if you guys go back and watch it, he throws a seam ball to Jalen Nailor, and the placement on it is perfect because he needs to leave it a little bit outside to his right in order to pull Nailor down and away from the safety. It's not a throw that, based on the coverage structure, you should make. Like, the way that the play actually unfolds shouldn't take you there. And he just makes a ridiculous throw. And then there was another 3rd down conversion on that drive where they used a little bit of motion. They got Brandon Powell in space and they got a conversion. And that, to me, feels like the blend that we're talking about with this Vikings team right now, where you've got Darnold making a couple big time throws in the first couple games, the corner out to Justin Jefferson in week 1, the huge touchdown to Justin Jefferson today, that Nailor throw. But then you've got Kevin O'Connell just really pulling the right levers at the right times. I've been very impressed with just what that passing game has looked like overall. And you've got several Darnold throws in this game that feel like an expression of his time with O'Connell within this offense. Like, there's the little bender in breaker to Jalen Nailor where he throws it on time and it's a completion. He has like an intermediate completion to Justin Jefferson at one point in this game where he has to check between a couple options. He has a check down to Trent Sherfield off a play action on 3rd down where he has to come all the way back to it. Just the way that he's playing within the offense when things are clean for him, I feel like you get a really good sense of why people think Kevin O'Connell is such a good offensive coach for quarterbacks. You can see how the offense is taught to him in the way that he's playing out the offense. The only times where he has his little whoopsies are where he gets pressured and he gets the zoomies a little bit. But when he's able to just sit and play the offense the way that it's designed, it looks very good right now.
It really does. And this, it's kind of twofold too. It's obviously Kevin O'Connell is a really good coach. And then on the other hand, I don't remember if it was on the broadcast or if it was just something I read, but Darnold had even spoken to the fact that, once he kind of got away from New York and was able to settle down even in Carolina for a little bit, and then obviously last year in San Francisco, he realized, hey man, not everything is on the quarterback. Like, I can let other things around me happen and just do my job. And I think obviously when you have a coach as good as Kevin O'Connell and some of the players that they have, it's easy to do that. And then truthfully too, the way they've been running the ball has been making it really easy for them to stay ahead of the sticks and get into some of these plays they want. Did you know they have the 6th highest rushing success rate in the league right now? The Vikings, I did not think that they would get there with this interior offensive line, but here they are.
We talked about it before the season. They needed to be able to run the ball on their terms. And if they could do that, you have faith in what Kevin O'Connell has shown in his ability to devise the passing game, especially when Justin Jefferson is in there. And Sam Darnold and I had that same conversation during training camp. And he said the same thing to me, where he's like, all I need to do is just put the ball where it's supposed to be on time. Like, everything else around me in this offense will get me there. And the thing that people always say about O'Connell and just why he's such a good coach with the quarterbacks is just a really good distillation and an explanation of, this is the intent of what we're trying to accomplish with these plays. This is why your eyes are going from here to here to here. This is why it's structured this way. And I think all offensive coordinators, to an extent, try to do that for their quarterbacks. But what I've gathered is he's just very, very good at communicating all that kind of stuff. And that's why we've seen any borderline full-time starter within this offense has played pretty good football. Kirk Cousins when he was healthy, and now we've seen 2 pretty good games from Sam Darnold to kick off the year. So I'm excited to see where the Vikings take this thing on both sides of the ball. And I think that 2-0 is not fluky to me. I think it's very well earned.
Yeah, I don't think it's fluky either. I think this is serious.
Let's get to our next segment here. When we kicked off last week, we're going to roll with a little bit of WTF.
What the
I don't have my bleep button in front of me because I didn't ask Beller for it beforehand. So we're just going to swear on this show and then maybe bleep it out for the audio version. The Rams season already feels like it's up in flames based on everybody that's gotten hurt. Puka Nacua is out. Sam Avila is out. Joe Nopum's out, all on IR. Cooper Kupp left this game with an ankle injury. Kevin Dotson and Kobe Durant were inactive for this game. So the Rams are now 2-0 and just completely crumbling on offense. What the fuck? Like the Rams season is just going to be over after 2 games because half a dozen guys are hurt and they can't stop anybody.
We're being robbed. We are being robbed by the injury gods, because this is the one thing that we said about the Rams offense coming in. Like when we did our concerns about what this offense may be, it wasn't any of the personnel. It wasn't the coaching. It wasn't the quarterback. Like we knew they had receivers. We knew they had pass catchers. We knew they had a great running back room. The offensive line, when they're healthy, they're good. But nobody is healthy. They are losing everybody man by man. The only guy left standing really is Matthew Stafford. And look, I know we think he's, top 5, top 6 quarterback at this point. He feels like a superhero at times, but at a certain point, there's only so much you can do. And at a certain point, it's going to start looking like it did back in Detroit when these were, 4, 5, 6 win teams.
Yeah, if it's going to be Tyler Johnson and Demarcus Robinson and Colby Parkinson, those guys are all fine as part of a collective on offense where they're your supporting pieces. I do not want to watch an NFL passing game that's built around Demarcus Robinson in 2024, especially with the guy we've seen play at this level at quarterback. I have no interest in that experience, and it feels like we are dangerously close to that point.
The thing about Demarcus Robinson, I don't think there's a funnier player in the league who consistently makes like one huge play a game. Obviously, this game they were losing by like
Demarcus Robinson is fine. For what Demarcus Robinson is, I'm totally fine with Demarcus Robinson. But again, the diet we're about to get of those guys, I'm not looking forward to.
Yeah, we're moving the sliders up a little too far on all of their usages.
To me, the bigger story from this game, though, outside of the Rams falling apart, is what the Cardinals look like on offense and what they've looked like, honestly, over the last couple of games. I'm very excited about what Kyler Murray put together today and just the different facets of it, because I feel like we talked about this a little bit, you and I, when it was actually unfolding. This felt like the perfect version of what this Cardinals offense is supposed to look like with Drew Petzing, with the supporting cast, and with Kyler Murray.
It's perfect. I mean, they have every single thing they wanted, and you could see glimpses of it last year, right? Where they were getting under center more. They were running the ball really, really well in kind of every way that they wanted to. They were doing a bunch of different concepts. You saw Kyler really start to come on at the back half of last season. It was like, okay, is that real? Like, can they keep that going? Is adding Marvin Harrison Jr., is that going to be enough to really send this thing into overdrive? It turns out it is. It turns out they have everything that they need. And Kyler, I thought what was so fun to watch about this game is the first maybe 2 or 3 scoring drives, it felt like Kyler was just in superhero mode. I mean, the throw that he makes to Marvin Harrison Jr. on the back line, incredible catch, by the way. And also, it's very funny that we spent an entire week worrying about the 4th overall pick and one of the greatest receiver prospects we've ever seen. And then within like 8 game minutes, he looks like the best player in the NFL. I thought that was very funny. So they connect on that play. And then I think on the next drive, he connects with Marvin Harrison Jr. again. Marvin Harrison Jr. is running a big, deep over route. He starts to get undercut by one of the Rams defenders, and he realizes, very smart player, obviously, his dad was Marvin Harrison. He realizes, oh, I need to just climb over this guy. So he climbs over, Kyler sees him, throws it, and he's fast enough, by the way, to go and score the touchdown. And so the fact that Kyler was just kind of in this creation, go make big play mode early on. And then I think even too on the next drive, he makes a scramble and throws another one up to Marvin Harrison Jr. So the fact that you had all that, and then as the game went on, he was just making a bunch of throws just in structure. He threw a corner out to, I think, Michael Wilson, another one to Trey McBride. That was just the throw and catch were one of the best that I think we saw this week. So just the fact that we got insane Kyler Murray and then put together Kyler Murray on top of how this run game has looked, I mean, they've got everything they want right now.
That's why I was so excited about it, because it was that combination of plays within structure and him just going out and making 3 or 4 plays himself. Because last year, they just didn't have the dudes to do that within structure outside of Trey McBride. That first touchdown where Marvin Harrison Jr. makes that play in the back corner of the end zone, like they needed a dude within this offense for it all to come together. And that's your moment of having the dude. The touchdown he scored on that big over, Kyler still has to like buy a little bit of time outside of the pocket. So that play almost feels like a combination of the two, where it's Marvin Harrison Jr. doing his thing sort of within structure, and then Kyler buying just a little bit more with his athleticism and with his mobility outside of the pocket. And then you have the scramble play you're talking about where Kyler escapes to his left. They do an actual scramble drill where Marvin literally flips around and takes it down the left sideline for a huge chunk gain. And then there was just like a 50-50 ball contested catch down the left sideline that Kyler just throws up to him. And it's like, this is it. Like just enough plays out of structure because you're Kyler Murray, enough plays in structure because you have a real dude as your number one receiver. And then you combine that with a really well-designed running game and a secondary pass catcher or a couple in Michael Wilson and Trey McBride. That was the idea for this offense. And we saw that idea on full display on Sunday.
And to your point about having dudes, the throw to Marvin Harrison Jr., where it's the 50-50 ball on the sideline, that gets them out of like inside their own 5. Like the Cardinals didn't have a guy really last year where it was like, man, we are just backed up. We need somebody to go do something. It was Kyler go run. And if everybody knows that that's the only play you have, it's not as effective. But the fact that Kyler now can just go throw it up to a top 5 pick, a wide receiver who can go make a play like that, it's very comforting to have some more options in an offense.
And they talked about it. The run game is still really, really productive. It's going to be really productive. It's well designed. I mean, this team right now is averaging the second highest EPA per play in the league. And from an explosiveness standpoint, Kyler last year in his 8 starts had 22 completions of 20 plus yards. He has 7 already over the first couple games.
That's preposterous. That is outrageous.
It feels different. And that was the whole thought of dropping a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. into this, is that not necessarily that we're going to have to change a lot of the things that we're doing, but when you put a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. instead of this version of Hollywood Brown at this stage of his career into that role, the complexion of the offense starts to change. And you have Kyler feeling a little bit more comfortable in year 2, and Kyler still being able to do the 4 or 5 things a game that very few guys can do. I had a conversation with Drew Petzing this offseason when we were at training camp. We're just talking about Kyler and the experience of coaching him. And he was very bullish on what Kyler could do this year. And you know me, like there are elements where I'm like, I have some reservations and and the guy, I want to see it actually happen. And his response was, even if there are some moments where it's not on time or it can be a tiny bit frustrating, there are going to be 6 or 7 times a game where he just makes me look like a genius. And I think we underrate what it feels like to have that sort of quarterback, both as a play caller and just for an offense, where it's just little moments that are going to show up, like the scramble that he had today, like the huge chunk scramble, where over the course that we probably won't even talk about that or think about that 2 weeks from now as we think about all the Marvin Harrison Jr. plays. But over the course of the season, those just start to stack up. And when you combine that with down-to-down efficiency, and it's not just those sorts of volatile plays, both good and bad, then you get an offense that really starts to feel dangerous and dynamic on multiple different fronts. And that's what the Cardinals feel like right now.
Exactly. If you can get 6 of those, Kyler Murray insane, superhero plays, and only limit, him to maybe 2 of the what were you doing type of plays, because the play calling is so good and the offensive line is better. And you have, honestly, like, I really like what Michael Wilson is for this offense. He's like their Robert Woods adjacent type of player.
Great. He is awesome. A great number 2 receiver. I mean, like not great in terms of like the pecking order, but like when you're trying to build an offense, yes, he is a very good number 2 wide receiver when you have a guy like Trey McBride, when you have a quarterback like Kyler Murray, and when you have this sort of run game. I really like the pieces and how they're supposed to all fit together.
Yeah, it's what we've talked about a million times with pass catching cores. You need to build it almost like a basketball lineup. Okay, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride are your star shooters. This is your guy to kind of help everything, fall in line. And so, yeah, I just love the way that this is built, the way that it's being called, and the way that Kyler Murray is playing. I love when he's playing like an MVP. It's just fun to watch, man.
Our next one here for what the fuck. I was almost throwing up during the Bears game today. There was actual vomit in an NFL game today. Josh Myers pukes on the football in the Packers win over the Colts at Lambeau Field. I want to listen to Matt LaFleur's commentary about this after the game, because it's definitely one of the best moments of the week.
I asked Malik why he didn't throw the ball on that 3rd down, and he told me that Josh threw up on the ball. I was like, that's the first time I've ever heard that. Matter of fact, the official came over to me, Sean came over to me and said, we saw your center thrown up on the ball. Do you want us to take him out next time? I said, absolutely. Please do that, because, you're talking about a critical situation, and it's 3rd down, and I've never had a throw with vomit on a football. So I don't know. I don't think Malik probably didn't appreciate that.
I have also never heard or seen that happen. So good on Matt LaFleur.
I played center in high school, and I also I puked before every game. So there was vomit involved in the football experience, but it was never on the field vomit. So I do feel a little bit better about this. But we had like a very Willie Beeman adjacent moment with that happening with Josh Myers. So there's just, you never know what's going to happen over the course of an NFL Sunday. There's always something fun waiting for you. The only thing grosser than Josh Myers puking on a ball that Malik Willis had to catch was what the Colts run defense did again today. 261 yards allowed on the ground to the Packers. And I mean, they got gashed in a bunch of different ways. How concerned are you about the state of this Colts run defense 2 weeks into the year?
Historically concerned. This is through 2 weeks, they have allowed 474 rushing yards. I went and looked this up on Pro Football Reference. This has not happened since the year 2000, and the closest was the 2002 Seahawks at 470 yards. So this is like historically bad. And I came out of week 1 saying, you know what? It looked really bad structurally. They were playing more cover 2 on early downs than I thought, so they were lighter in the box. Maybe it was just week 1. Maybe the Texans' run game is just way better than I thought. And then they come out and do this, and it just does not look like a put together run defense at all. I mean, guys are getting moved around, both on the interior and off the edge. They're not really doing anything interesting up front. Like, they're not really sending that many run blitzes. Like, none of their stunts and twists are like really interesting in the run game. And then to me, it seemed the biggest issue, they're second level run defenders. And I said this last week. It seems like they're playing in quicksand. Like, they're just waiting for things to happen. They're not, the ball's getting snapped and they're not moving downhill. And I don't know if it's, they're being coached harder now to play the pass and they're just being slower for that reason, or if these players just like, I can't figure out what the impetus is for why they are playing this way, but they're playing as the slowest linebacker unit in the league right now. And then until this gets fixed, they're going to allow 200 yards every single game until this gets fixed.
I will say, though, for today specifically, the Packers were making it very hard on them with some of the stuff that they were doing.
LaFleur was gaming.
LaFleur was so deep in the bag with some of the run game stuff that they were doing. I mean, there's like 6 or 7 examples from this game. There's a play early in the game where they're in split back with Dontavian Wicks. They have Wicks kind of go in like a quick motion to the left, and then they do a reverse pivot handoff to Josh Jacobs coming back the other way. They had a pin pull play from a split back look where Jaden Reed was the split back to the left side, and then they had Josh Jacobs lead blocking for him going to the right. They had Bo Melton run an end around going back to the left, where they had the left guard pulling to the right. It's remember that scene from Little Giants where it's just like the guards in the backfield. Like that's how it felt with watching the Packers run game today. On that play, Jenkins pulls to the left. Josh Myers, the center, releases to his left. And so it's just, they're like crisscrossing in ways that like you don't often see with NFL running games. And so the Colts linebackers, I think justifiably, were completely lost. Like their heads were just spinning throughout the entire game because every key you could probably try to hone in on in terms of, oh, well, the guard's moving that way. That's probably the way that the play is going. It was a false flag and a false signal because of how just crazy complex all the things that the Packers run game was doing in this game.
And that's what makes LaFleur one of the best coaches in the league. I think he's a great coach regardless, but I think he probably saw that week 1 and went, their second level defenders are playing really slow and not triggering on anything. Let's make them think a little bit longer even. Let's get some pulling. Let's have some guys running full steam ahead in between the tackles and really go taking them out. So I thought he did a great job in that sense. It also, I don't know where I would have even searched for the numbers on this. It felt like a quarter of their run game involved an end around in some form or fashion, whether they were actually giving that guy the ball or he was just a decoy for something, or they were doing an end around and then maybe throwing like a swing screen to it. I mean, it's just, they were getting a guy fully across the formation. It felt like on a quarter of their plays. And honestly, if your run game can be this good and you're playing a run defense this bad, and you're inserting a backup quarterback in there who a big part of his skill set is being able to run the ball and do some of these RPO stuff. I mean, I thought it's a masterful game plan. And doesn't Matt LaFleur, it seems like once a year he has a game like this where he just has to do something so bizarre. Like I always go back to that Aaron Jones versus the Cardinals game where Aaron Jones got like 1 billion touches because that was all they had. It just seems like he has a game like this every year. Like he truly is one of my most favorite offensive play callers to watch.
You lose your quarterback who you paid $55 million a year before the season. Somebody that I think legitimately was like an MVP candidate, somebody that people were really, really excited about in his second year as a starter and what your team could do. You lose him in week 1. You come into week 2 with a guy that has been on your roster for like 20 days because you traded for him right before the season started. You are tasked with winning a football game. And the Packers said, okay, what is the best way for us to try to win this football game? And the answer was one of the craziest plans we've seen from a run game in recent memory. There was a point in this game where they had 21 rushing attempts and 4 passes. That was the basis of how this was going to work. And that's what being a football coach is. These are the players that you have. This is the task that you have in front of you. How are you going to try to win the game? And the answers that the Packers landed on was phenomenal in this game. Phenomenal.
And that's what it is. It's that it was interesting. It was unique. It wasn't, oh, our quarterback is a backup, so we're just going to run the ball for running the ball's sake, and they didn't have a great plan for it and all this other stuff. No, dude, LaFleur spent some extra hours this week trying to figure out how this thing was going to work, and boy, did it.
Talking about the end arounds and just that idea in general, we've just seen a ton of them across the entire league this year. And I think that that's a product mostly of, all right, if we're going to be in a place where it's harder than it's ever been to find explosives because of the way the defenses are playing, we need to manufacture them in every way possible. And I think end arounds have been one of those things. And the other thing that's kind of come up and I've noticed is just the amount of fake screens that we've seen. Like the Chris Godwin touchdown today is another one of those where it's a fake bubble that he takes down the left sideline. We've seen so many of those over the first 2 weeks because how am I trying to create an explosive if there's going to be a cap over me on defense? And I think faking those bubbles and trying to get like some sort of deception into the plan, I've seen probably at least a half dozen of those, and a good chunk of them have worked over the first couple of weeks. So I think just in this general space where defenses are playing this way and we're struggling to find explosive plays, you're going to see more of that kind of stuff because it's almost necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, when we used to live into a cover 3 world and a lot of maybe your flat defenders going down to maybe defend some of those fake screens and stuff where DBs, it's like, okay, they're faster. They can cover more ground. They're probably smarter in coverage. A lot of the times now it's if you're playing more of this too high stuff, it is a linebacker who is tasked with that sort of stuff. Not as fast, can't cover as much ground, not as used to having to deal with that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's even what we saw in this game. Like Jack Campbell was the one who kind of got beat on that. So, yeah, it's a really great point.
One last one here. The Ravens. The Ravens blow another double-digit lead in the second half against the team that they're supposed to beat. They had a touchdown lead in the fourth quarter. The offense still looks disjointed. Ravens, what the fuck? Like, where do you want to start with this? I am getting very frustrated with watching this team lose these sorts of games over the last couple of years against teams that they're supposed to beat.
Why is it always Gardner Minshew in September? Last year, week 3 against the Indianapolis Colts, they lose that game in overtime to who else? Gardner Minshew. What is wrong? Like, why is it like that this team just walks in and they're like, we can beat Gardner Minshew, right? And like they maybe take like a half week off, and then here we are. We end up in this game. But no, more seriously, I just thought at the end of this game, Max Crosby they send him on a loop to hit Lamar, and it just instantly nukes like their final drive. And that's kind of been the early story for the Baltimore Ravens this season, right? Is that their offensive line, when they absolutely need it in crunch time, do not have it for Lamar Jackson.
So that was going to be my question. As you're thinking about why the offense feels disjointed, and you could throw out whatever numbers you want to, the one that stuck out to me, they're 6 of 19 passing the ball on third down so far this season. So when they're in defined passing situations on third down, they've really struggled. And I think that a big reason for that is their inability to hold up in defined passing situations. So as you're trying to pin down why this group has felt a little bit frustrating, you would start with the offensive line first and foremost.
I would start with the offensive line first and foremost. I think it's really hard for them to have very sound pass protection plans when I think you're just going to get, they're rotating guys in and out every now and then. They're just getting beat every which way whenever guys send stunts. They're not picking up blitzes very well. I also think part of the problem is, and this is an issue that had kind of stemmed back to, the Greg Roman era and even some of these receivers that are still on the roster, the timing of this passing offense when they really, really need it, like when you just need a guy to hit a window on 3rd and 7 and get in there and stick the throw, this quarterback and this pass catching room is just not great at that. Like Zay Flowers.
I'm totally with you on that.
Like Zay Flowers, for as useful as he is in some ways, all of his best plays are just like he finds space on an over route late in the down. And like that can work every now and then, but that's not consistent. Rashad Bateman, I think, has had issues. Like the interception Lamar Jackson threw to Rashad Bateman Rashad Bateman like kind of shies away from a stick route and doesn't get his body all the way in there, and it gets tipped up and it gets intercepted.
But
Mark
even
Andrews,
on that play, that play was a really good example, because on that play, they're using motion because I think they believe
Right.
they're going to get man coverage on third down. And the Raiders, he runs with the motion, but then they bump it over. And I think the Raiders did a really good job of that stuff today, where they think, all right, we think it's going to be man here, but it's actually zone. We think it's going to be zone here where it's actually man. I think they did keep them a little bit off balance, but that's a play where the timing is just completely disrupted. And so that over and over again, it's just like, it's a little bit off for this reason or another. And I think that we've consistently seen that.
Yeah, like none of the receivers are that type of player. And then even Lamar's timing has always been, he kind of moves to the beat of his own drum sometimes. And that can just really get you when you're in some of these 3rd and 7s when the pass protection is not going to hold up and maybe give you some of that time to go find a scrambling window. So I think that's really the big issue for this offense. And I was hoping that it would be a little bit better in year 2 of the Todd Monken offense. So, I mean, I'll still give them a couple more weeks to figure it out, but so far it is not any different than I think we saw last year.
And you would hope that if the passing game was going to look a little bit disjointed, that they would be able to run the ball consistently. 6 of Derrick Henry's 18 runs in this game were successful. 6 of 18. And it's been a problem over the first 2 weeks. So they've really struggled to find their footing. And then the issue was they still should have won this game despite all of that, because the Raiders couldn't move the ball. And then all hell broke loose in the 3rd and 4th quarter. Like the amount of 2nd and 20s and 3rd down conversions that the Raiders had over those final 3 drives was absolutely maddening.
Gardner Minshew can make one great play for you a game. And the one where he scrambles out to the right and finds Brock Bowers like a 25-yard, 30 yards down the field, that was the one. And it was like, man, if Minshew's hitting that play this game, they might have a chance. And then they did, and they won the game.
And there was a 3rd down earlier on that drive where the Ravens bring 5. There was like 4 minutes. There's like 5 minutes left in the 3rd quarter. The Ravens bring 5. Minshew just buys a little bit of time and hits Jacoby Myers on that deep curl against Marlon Humphrey. And I mean, there's a bunch of plays in the second half where they came up huge. That 2nd and 20 completion to Devontae Adams on that huge scissors concept where Minshew puts that on the money. There's the toe tap play to Devontae Adams down the left sideline on a huge chunk. The Devontae Adams go ball on, I think it was the 2nd to last drive where Minshew just puts it on the money. And then there was a 2nd and 9 completion of Bowers on that drive where he's completely uncovered. Bowers against Trenton Simpson on 3rd and 5. And then the 3rd and goal PI from Brandon Stevens on Devontae Adams in the end zone. Game over. Like that plus the Max Crosby sack, that's the game. And so it only took 4 or 5 plays, but they gave them the opening to allow those 4 or 5 plays to happen and for Gardner Minshew to black out for just long enough to pull this thing off.
And wasn't that kind of the formula with this Raiders team? Is like we have our star players, right? We have Devontae Adams, we drafted Brock Bowers, we have Max Crosby. We just need our stars to do something and pray that we can get enough out of Gardner Minshew. And then they did. I don't know how many times they can do that over the course of a season, but at least we know they can prove it against a decent team.
Yeah, it's everything just feels like they don't have a good sense for what they're trying to accomplish and why. Like even like the 3rd down go ball to Nelson Aguilar in one-on-one situations. Like that's what you want to do on 3rd and 8. You want to throw a go ball to Nelson Aguilar? Like that's your best option here?
But that's the other thing is like who is supposed to be there? I need to play on 3rd and 8. Like we just talked about with the Cardinals, right? Like they didn't have a guy last year, bringing Marvin Harrison Jr. He can go make that play for you. The Ravens just don't have that guy. Like they have guys who are useful at certain things. Like I think at this point, what we've seen from Mark Andrews, he's probably not that tier of player anymore. Isaiah Likely is nice. I don't think he is that tier of player consistently. Zay Flowers is just not that kind of player. Nelson Aguilar, like they just don't have a guy where it's like, man, we need 8 yards. Can you go get it? It's been Lamar. It's just that, like we said, if he's going to get heated up immediately and be forced out of the pocket immediately, it's hard to consistently rely on him and allow him to make those plays.
Let's get to Did You See That, which is the segment that we use to talk about a couple moments from the Sunday slate that we just wanted to touch on very briefly that jumped out to us.
Did you see that? Did you see that?
This is essentially what we want to be like the living version of our Slack channel over the course of a Sunday, where there's like little moments that come up over the course of the day where it's just like, did you see what so-and-so just did? The first one I wanted to talk about, because I think both you and I were very excited to send these messages to each other. Did you see how Geno Smith played in this game against the Patriots today?
Dude, this was a game that I was like only watching on and off during like while it was happening. And I was like, okay, he's making some really cool plays. That's nice to see. I went back and watched it during like Sunday Night Football. Oh my God, man. I think he might have played the best game of anybody this week. He was absolutely on fire for every single play. I mean, like it just felt like everything that he wanted, he got. The out route he threw to at one point to JSN was incredible. Early in the second half, there's a play that he makes. I think I tweeted this one out where he's getting some pressure off of his right. I think it's a 3rd and 7. He slides.
3rd and 7.
Yep, he slides like 2 yards to his left as he's still moving, just rips the ball in between 2 hole defenders over the middle of the field. Absolutely puts it on the money. There's a 2nd and 1 he throws to DK in the 4th quarter. There's, I think, maybe my favorite throw, and maybe the 2nd 7 I just mentioned was my favorite throw, but there's another one late in the game where DK Metcalf is running a shallow route from left to right, and Geno gets pressured a little bit, and he's got to move outside the pocket. He moves outside. He pump fakes the defender in front of him, in front of DK Metcalf to move him out of the window, and then like sidearm whips the pass to DK Metcalf. I was like, man, if Geno Smith is out here putting a little bit of sauce on some of these throws, they're gonna win this game. And then lo and behold, they did. He finished it out.
Geno last year, I think we've seen each season, in my opinion, there's been little improvements with how he's playing the position. Last year, I think it was the pocket management, where his ability to evade sacks, to just navigate that space was very impressive. This year so far, and especially today, it's been what he's doing outside of the pocket. Like the work that he was doing after escaping the pocket today was remarkable. And then he obviously had the monster scramble in week 1 for the touchdown. In this game today, he was 7 of 7 on throws outside of the pocket. And I want to say I lost what the actual number was, but he was 7 of 7 on throws outside of the pocket, and consistently 7 for 7 for 76 yards on throws outside of the pocket. And the amount of sack avoidance and just making plays outside of structure was phenomenal. And so he finished this game 33 of 44 for 327 yards. I want to go over some of the incompletions and just like what they were. 2 of them are on one-on-one throws outside the numbers on slot fades that he should be taking. Like those are objectively good decisions within the structure of the offense. Easily could have been complete 50-50 balls. We're taking a shot on every single time. 2 tipped balls. Metcalf drops the ball on a slant at one point in the game. The best throw of his day, maybe, was a drop by JSN on the left side outside the numbers. It was 2nd and 20. And he just puts it on JSN as he's kind of twisting back to the sideline, and JSN can't hold on to it. He was very good in this game, by the way, though. Jackson Smith-Njigba, and I'm very excited for what he's going to look like within this offense. But that's a drop. There's a play late in the game where Noah Fant has a killer drop on what should have been a 1st down completion, and then there's a spike. So 11 completions. We just went over like 9 of them. And that's before you take into account the degree of difficulty on the plays he was making against a very good Patriots team and a very good Patriots front. He was stone cold today.
I'm so glad you say it that way. The degree of difficulty. That is why Geno Smith has been such a compelling quarterback since he became the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, is that the throws that he is willing to make, I said it before, it's why I love watching Dak Prescott or Matthew Stafford or obviously Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. Like they are just willing to make throws that are so damn hard in pockets that are closing and with such like very small windows of timing that they can be hit. But Geno's money, man. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league, and he can throw that thing through a wall. Like it's just, he's such an impressive player. And then what you mentioned with what he did outside of the pocket, I remember in 2022 when he really took over, for the Seahawks. I remember tweeting with Mina Kimes. I think it was at the Saints game. He had an insane play like rolling to his left that he made a throw. And I was like, I was not aware Geno Smith had this in his bag, but it still wasn't fully a complete part of his game yet. But now, like you mentioned, this is something that I think he can do consistently. And it just seems like he adds a little bit of something every year now. And if that's going to be the next step on top of what we've seen with some of the growth that he can make just as a pure pocket passer, pure pocket manager, I mean, he's just such a delight to watch.
So this is what I'm talking about with the degree of difficulty, though. The degree of difficulty was there over the last couple of years. What we were excited about with Geno within this offense was not having to do that all the time. And I think the JSN prominence within the offense is part of this, where you just have that sort of receiver. That's a big part of what you're doing, but also the way he's deployed. It's a very quiet play within the course of this game. It's 3rd and 4 with like 9.5 minutes left in the first quarter. They're in a bunch to the left side with JSN as the number 3 receiver. He runs just like a quick little out route through traffic against man coverage, and Geno hits him at the sticks for a first down. It's a completely forgettable play in the grand scheme of the game for the most part. But those are the sorts of plays that weren't available to the Seahawks offense last year. They were abysmal on 3rd down against man coverage because they didn't have those sorts of concepts built into who they wanted to be. Everything was super spread out because Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, for the most part, were the focal points of your passing game. So just building in little things like this. Let's run a little rub route from the slot on 3rd and short to give our guy a layup and keep a drive going. It's not rocket science, but when you combine that with the high-end stuff that the guy is capable of, that is why I was so excited about what this could look like this year.
That's a great way to frame it too, because you don't need to scheme up the really difficult intermediate and explosive plays for Geno's. Like he can just make those throws even if they're covered. You just need to get some easy ones, and it's not because he can't make the short throws. It's just they didn't, like you said, they didn't have that in the offense last year. If you can just get 2 or 3 of those a game where he just doesn't have to do anything, we're cooking.
Yeah, and I think that the JSN inclusion and what he could be in this, that's why I was also excited about it. And I think today was proof of concept about what that could look like. Speaking of guys in this game, the other person I wanted to talk about from the Patriots-Seahawks game is Keion White, who is just insane. Like, that guy just plays like he is shot out of a cannon for most of the game. He had a sack and a half today and a TFL. He had a 25% pressure rate. He probably could have done a lot more damage if Geno wasn't doing what he was doing in terms of sack avoidance and moving around the pocket. But I'm extremely excited about Keion White and what he looks like in year 2 within this Patriots defense.
He is mean, dude. Like, just a violent, long like they're not 1-to-1 in terms of how they're built or necessarily in how they play, but it feels a lot like watching a guy like Eric Armstead, where just the length and the strength is so overwhelming and overpowering at certain points. And that's certainly what you saw in this game. Keion White, coming into the year, I think he had 1 sack last season, but it seemed like almost everybody who watched film and was like excited about the Patriots defense was like, listen, if this guy can just turn it on a little bit and like figure himself out a little bit, the talent is there. And we've already seen it through 2 weeks. He's been one of their most productive players. He's just, that first sack he had, he murders the left guard. Just absolutely caves him. And what was most impressive,
and that's what I love, is that he's lining up all over the place. You never know where he's going to be. He's beating the left guard on one play, he's beating the right guard on one play, he's over the center on one play, he's lined up over the right tackle on one play. The fact that they're willing to deploy him like this, it's part of why it feels so dynamic when you watch him.
It's like watching Clowney. That's what Clowney was always good at, is being able to move everywhere and just have the length and the strength to beat everybody.
I think his hands are better than Clowney's right now than Clowney's ever were until last year.
That might be true, actually, because Clowney used to just be the best athlete on the field, so he could get away with it. That's a great point. But yeah, and you know what was most impressive to me too about that first sack was he beats the left guard, I think, through the inside shoulder, and Geno like slides to the left and starts to come up. Keion White somehow bends the corner 90 degrees straight around, like on the spot around the guard, and gets to Geno. And it's like, dude, how do you have that level of flexibility at 285 or whatever he is?
That's why it's so crazy and so encouraging. That's what makes it exciting. It's just the way he moves. It's the power, the explosion, the bend, and some of the stuff he's doing with his hands. It's just one of those guys where you feel like he's always bending back toward the quarterback or moving toward the quarterback. Like, there's just always that forward momentum to the quarterback from any angle that he's trying to attack from. He feels like one of those guys. So I really cannot wait to see where he takes it this year, because he's been one of my favorite players to watch over the first 2 weeks of the season. Somebody else who had a monster day as a pass rusher that we did not talk about in the Lions section, but deserves mention. Aidan Hutchinson had 4.5 sacks today, and it was just feasting on Justin School. One of the reasons that the Bucs had to win this game because of defense is because of what Aidan Hutchinson was doing to the right side of their offensive line over the course of this entire game.
And you know what's funny too? The 3 sacks in the middle, he did the same thing the entire time. The first one, he gets
nothing
free
complicated about it.
Yeah, it was nothing complicated. The first sack he had in the game, they loop him inside and he gets free and he gets the hit. Then the next 3 sacks after that, one of those might have been counted as a half sack. I don't remember. But he just cooks the guy off the right edge. That's it. Nothing to it. He just beats him off the edge, hand swipes, boom, turns the corner. That's it. Just absolutely nothing to it. So the fact that I think they struggled so much to to find answers for when like you are going into the game knowing that this is going to be a problem, and then it continues to be a problem very early on in the game, and it took them so long to adapt. Just a credit to his ability to just, he's like kind of being a backup tackle merchant right now, but the fact that you can be this productive doing it, I mean, you're forcing offenses to play a different way.
Last one here. Did you see that Quentin Johnston scored 2 touchdowns today?
I could not believe that. It's not even just that he scored 2 touchdowns. It's the way that he scored the first one. It's like kind of a catch in traffic. He's got to go low. He's like fighting with the corner. The whole thing was that Quentin Johnston can barely catch the ball when he's just open by himself. The fact that he could go make a play like that while he's contested, I was like, all right, man, maybe we got a different player on our hands. And you know what? He looked kind of good with the ball in his hands in week 1. I don't know if we're ever going to get him to be as good as he was, for what a first round pick should be, but maybe he can be useful, and that would be a nice spot for the Chargers to be in.
Yeah, I'm excited to rewatch the Chargers game. I did not watch a ton of that game, and we'll get to a couple others that we really didn't, have a chance to dig into today, but that was one of them. So I'm looking forward to kind of rewatching what the Chargers have looked like over the first couple of weeks. Let's get to another segment that we kicked off last week, and let's chat about what is so over after week 2.
It's over. So over.
The Jacksonville Jaguars. It's so over?
It's way over, man. Like we went into this week saying, I was worried if they lose this game, keep in mind they have at Bills and at Texans as their next 2 games. You are not going to be favored in either of those games. Like preseason odds would not have put you at favorites in those games, let alone how you've looked these first 2 games. Like there's a real shot 0-4 is on the table. And this game was just, it was frustrating because it was the exact opposite of last week, in the sense that last week the offense looked great for the first half. And then in the second half, they completely just fell apart. In this game, they did nothing for the entire first half. In the second half, started to figure themselves out, and it just turned out it was too little too late, because you end up taking a safety, and then it starts pissing rain on your final comeback drive. Like, it was just the worst thing that could have happened for this team.
I wanted to throw out a stat to encapsulate what the Jacksonville Jaguars experience was today. The Bears in that game, the unwatchable game that the Bears just played, had a negative play or a play for 0 yardage on 44% of their snaps with 3 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter. That's when I checked this. And I assume it didn't get any worse. It might have gotten close, but it was 44% for the first 55 minutes of the game. The Jags finished at 49% today. 49.
Half. That seems impossible.
Half their plays went for 0 or negative yardage in this game. I mean, you could throw out so many examples. My favorite stretch of the game, they have a 2nd and 5 with 7:15 left in the third
I know exactly where this is. Oh my God. I had this outlined in my notes as well.
The run goes for -3, the run to Travis Etienne. So it goes from 2nd and 5 to 3rd and 8. On the next play, Myles Garrett just toasts the left tackle for a sack. Just absolutely.
Trevor doesn't even finish his drop back. Trevor does not finish his drop back.
It's immediate. Cam Robinson had his moments in this game, some rough moments in this game. It's immediate. So we have a -3 yard run on 2nd and 5. We had Myles Garrett toasting your left tackle for a sack on 3rd down. And then on 4th down, they missed the field goal.
And you know what?
That's it. That is it.
And if they had hit this field goal on their final drive, they wouldn't have needed a touchdown, so they could have played for the field goal. It just, oh my God, everything about this game. And 2, I have another frustrating stat about this game. They pressured Deshaun Watson on 44% of his dropbacks, and they did not get to him really until the second half. Deshaun Watson, I didn't count. He probably slipped out of 8 different sacks in this game. The Jaguars just could not tackle him. The fact that your defense could play this well and they could not get the negative plays that they want. I mean, Brenton Strange had 7 targets in this game, which just, if that is one of your guys who's getting that many targets, that is also not a way to win a football game. And I know he had a couple of good plays, but that is just not a way to win a football game. They had even 2 in the second half of this game. They get down into the red zone. They get on the goal line. They have a sprint left play where I forget. I think he hits Gabe Davis on the left pylon. Gets taken away by an illegal shift penalty. Oh, great. That just keeps happening with this offense, where there's just some sort of sloppy penalty. On the next play, Trevor bails out of the pocket to his right, tries to find Travis Etienne on the back line of the end zone. As soon as Trevor is releasing the ball, Etienne slips. And it is, of course, incomplete when it would have obviously been a touchdown if Etienne could stand up. And then they don't end up scoring a touchdown on that drive. Like, it was just everything that could happen.
I personally loved the couple snaps where Gabe Davis was in man coverage against Denzel Ward, and they tried to throw him the ball, and Denzel Ward was physically in his pocket on both of those plays.
The first one is so funny, where they run like the play action stop route, and he just never had a chance.
He was in his pocket throughout the entire play. And so I don't know. Again, you'd hope that it looks better when they're not playing the Browns defense. I mean, that's really the only positive way that you can spin this. But like we mentioned, 0-2. You're about to play the Bills and the Texans over your next 2 weeks. There's absolutely a chance you could be 0-4. And at 0-4, your season is over. And even at 1-3, you're probably in a pretty bad spot. So losing that game against Miami, they probably should have won based on how they played over the course of that game. And then falling to 0-2 against this offense that is still struggling. The Browns offense didn't play well today, like you mentioned, and they managed to win this game because the Jags offense is completely incompetent. So that's where we are right now, and it is a pretty scary place to be.
And you know what, really quickly, the thing that really scares me the most about this, it's not that they're 0-2, it's not that the season's over, it's not that they're this sloppy, it's that Trevor's post-game press conference, that was a defeated man. Like, he just not having it. And so the fact that that's where we're at in week 2, it's not good, man.
We're going to run through some things here that we're going to talk about as part of our watch list heading into the week, because I want to just acknowledge a few things at the end of these Sunday shows that we didn't get a chance to look at, but you and I want to go back and watch over the course of Monday and Tuesdays. We get a chance to dig into the film. I've got 2. I want to just look at what's happening with Sean Payton and Bo Nix and that Broncos offense. I watched it in week 1 when they played against Seattle, but I watched almost none of the Steelers Broncos game today as I was watching Chiefs Bengals. So that's something I absolutely want to go back and watch. And another game, just because of the 10 games happening at noon, that was just hard to keep track of. I did not watch much of Jets Titans. And I really want to just go back and take a look at what that Jets offense looked like in week 1 after they struggled, or what they looked like in week 2 after struggling against the Niners. So those 2 things are kind of at the top of my week 2 watch list as we get into Monday and Tuesday.
I think those are some good ones. I mean, Jets Titans, Braylon Allen scored a couple of touchdowns. That's a guy I liked as a prospect. So it's very, very nice to see. I definitely want to see how they put that together. For me, it was mostly just, I kind of want to take a closer look at the Ravens passing game. You know, I mentioned it a little bit in this game, you know, how it looked like watching it live and on the broadcast, but I'd like to dig in it a little deeper. And then on the flip side of that very same game, Brock Bowers, man, 100 yards today. I would like to see how they were doing some of that, because this is a player that, you know, I think this team, the Raiders, took a little bit of flack for like, oh, why are you taking a tight end in the first round when you have all these other roster problems? Good player, though. So
we're going to wrap this up the same way we did last week. And what we're going to do with all of these recap shows this season, we're going to talk about what we learned today.
You know, I think I've learned something today.
What did you learn after week 2 of this NFL season?
I have learned that maybe the Mike Zimmer thing is going to take a little bit more time than I was hoping. I think after week 1, got a little bit over my skis, got very excited with how it looked against a not very good Cleveland Browns offense. And then this week, man, you know, we talked about it a little bit earlier with the Saints offense. They got forced into base. They couldn't do a lot of the interesting stuff that I think we are very keen to seeing from Mike Zimmer. And when you get forced into base personnel, and you get forced to play a kind of vanilla defense, you've got to just have the players at that point. And I think we saw very quickly that this Dallas Cowboys defense, outside of 2 or 3 guys that are Pro Bowlers, just do not have the players right now.
The amount of Linval Joseph snaps that we're getting as part of that run defense in 2024 is concerning.
How many years have we been saying that, by the way, about a Linval Joseph? It's like whoever goes and gets him.
That's where we are right now. And I mean, even like Osa Digizua was struggling in the run game today. 35, whose name I cannot remember, the linebacker, the young linebacker, he was all over the place. I mean, they just don't have a lot of speed. And Overshawn is explosive, but he wasn't on the field as much as he was in week 1 because they were in base defense the entire game. So you're dealing with 35, you're dealing with Eric Kendricks, and you're dealing with a defensive line that just does not have the bodies that you want on the interior. Like, it's consistently was a problem over the course of the game.
Yeah, and I think at this point we've seen now, kind of like I said, both sides of the Zimmer coin. Week 1, we got all the interesting stuff. We got all the speed. We got some of the, you know, really cool pressures and coverage rotations. And then this week we got what we feared with the Cowboys defense, which was, they just don't got the dudes.
My what did we learn today is that we know nothing coming into an NFL season about what is going to work and what is not going to work. Think about the discourse around teams in the NFC South heading into the year, and think about what Dave Canales was supposed to be for Bryce Young potentially. Dave Canales did such a good job with Baker Mayfield and such a notable job with Baker Mayfield that he was hired as a head coach and the play caller for the Panthers in order to try to save the Bryce Young experiment. Well, 2 weeks into the season, the Bryce Young experiment looks disastrous, and we've gotten absolutely no positive returns from the initial inclusion of Dave Canales as part of that overall formula. How many people celebrated when Clint Kubiak got hired to be the offensive coordinator for the Saints? We had seen Clint Kubiak as an offensive coordinator. He was the offensive coordinator in Minnesota for a year. He gets fired. He moves on, goes to San Francisco, kind of sits on their staff, and is just one of the guys on that tree. And as the tree keeps getting picked over, he was one of the next people in line to get one of those jobs. And I thought that they did a fine job when he was the offensive coordinator in Minnesota. But the fact that he is the coordinator for the most explosive offense in the NFL over the first 2 weeks, even if you were bullish on the Saints, I don't think you possibly could have envisioned something like this. And I think that's always a lesson early in the season, is that we really don't have the best understanding of which of these schematic shifts in a given offseason is going to work and which one isn't. And so the fact that the Panthers look completely hapless after hiring Canales and the Saints look like a monster that has fully unleashed the likes of Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed after 2 weeks, I think is just a reminder that we probably know less than we want to any given year about how some of these changes and how some of these hires are going to take.
And even just with Canales, we were kind of asking the question of like, oh man, Canales did such a good job with Baker Mayfield and some of what they were doing in the passing game. And then the Bucs go and hire Liam Cohen. And we're like, is he going to do as good a job as David Canales did? And then I think like the Bucs offense might be better. It might be more interesting. And so that's just it seems like this entire division, kind of like you said, wraps up what that discussion was, where sometimes we just don't know. I mean, the Kubiak hiring almost felt like, Dennis Allen, this was maybe going to be the last year. Let me just go grab anybody from this.
That's
Shanahan
exactly how it felt. It felt like the last gasp of like, all right, let's just see if we can steal any of this heat and try to get to a place where there's some excitement for us on offense. Like we are a decidedly above average offense. We can still trot out an average defense because I'm Dennis Allen and we still have enough pieces on that side and we can compete to be a middling 500 team in the NFC South. And then instead they look ridiculously explosive over the first 2 weeks. And to bring it full circle, this extends to even what we saw on Sunday night, right? Shane Waldron gets hired to be the Bears offensive coordinator. And there are people who are like, oh, well, Shane Waldron coordinated a borderline top 10 offense over the last couple of years in Seattle. Like this is a guy who's done this before. He has experience. Like this is somebody who will at least give you some semblance of competence as you start doing this. Well, I think what we're learning slowly is that he played with a really, really good quarterback in Seattle over the last couple of years, a guy who did a very good job masking some of those problems. So you look at the final numbers, and when you actually start to try to untie why those numbers look like they did, that's the beauty of football, is that there are like 100 different factors that actually play into why those things ultimately look the way that they do. And even if you do all this research and you try to understand it as best you possibly can, there's still going to be so much gray area that it's hard to fully grasp what things are going to look like when you move a guy from one situation into the other, whether it's a coach, a quarterback, whoever. And I think that's why it's just such a fun experience every single year, opening the season and trying to figure out what you're going to get, because there's always going to be some surprises just because there's no way to possibly account for all of those factors and what they're going to look like when they're all lined up.
Yeah, you just don't know. And we spend more months trying to unpack that stuff than we spend actually getting to watch it. And then we end up by 2-3 weeks in realizing, oh, okay, this was right and this was wrong and this was completely out of left field.
All right. That is all we've got for today. Sincerely appreciate all of you guys listening. We will be back on Wednesday with our midweek show. Until then, really appreciate it. We'll talk to you guys soon.